Yo, hello. Today I'm going to be going over Soren's assigned decoy gimmick, which allows any unit to become a near save or far save. And in my opinion, this is probably going to be one of the biggest meta things going forward for a long while. And because of that, I figured it would be worth talking about some highlightable units or skills that you could give out if you want to build any sort of unit that may not necessarily have a PRF to call their own, but you would still want to use them. Because with this, there's a lot more flexibility in unit performances. So even old units like OG Lucas, who may not have really seen a lot of spotlight, could even be used here. I'm going to be going over what in my opinion could work and what probably won't work. And if you're looking to use this as some sort of like fun gimmick for any of your units that you particularly want to use as a near or far save, then I would take this video into consideration. But yeah, we may as well get right into it. The first few things I do want to point out are just how it works and whether or not you could use it with certain skills or weapons or anything of the sort. Basically, any unit that Soren is ally supporting or any unit that has the highest defense on the map, which can also be multiple units if they're matching, can get the savior status. And that savior status is based on the allies and foes' range. For example, because a sword has one range, it's going to act as a near save, and because a tome is a 2 ranged weapon, it's going to act as a far save. It's all determined based on the range of the weapon, and the status itself can't really make swords or one ranged weaponry far saves and vice versa. It's unfortunately more limited that way, so you'll have to keep that in mind. Also, what's worth keeping in mind is that preempt does not work with savior. This was already something that was future-proofed way back when preempt first came out, but you shouldn't be able to use it because it is still the savior effect. Likewise, if you wanted to try and run a unit that has both near and far save, you can't do that because it does overlap. And while it would have been really cool to try, they unfortunately also future-proof that, so you can't have a near and far save in one unit. But that's probably not the biggest deal, mainly because I don't think their performance would have been as great, but that's neither here nor there. And finally, this is just something worth mentioning too. Multiple units with the effect that are either acting as a near save or far save will cancel it out. This is just a regular save thing, by the way. If you have 2 near saves or 2 far saves that can protect a unit in range, neither of them will go off. And that's going to apply when giving out the status too. So if you thought about using it with Citrine, horrible idea. I highly do not recommend using it with Citrine because she spreads it everywhere. But that's pretty much all you really have to take into account when using Soren's savior status gimmick. Now let's talk about the near saves, because there's a lot more that you could do with near saves in my opinion than far saves. This isn't the entire list. There's going to be a whole list of units that are notably standout / just generics and blah blah. But as far as the best ones go, I think the ones that have really good defensive capabilities, nuking prowess, or have a guidance niche can be really beneficial here. For example, if you were to slap guard bearing 4, guidance 4 on anyone like Altina, Har, Cherish, Summermail, Shez, the benefit in my opinion with this is that you can have allies teleport in, and if they're still in range of a foe that is melee, they can then near save and protect the ally. And while I do think it's also potentially safer to just stay back, it opens a lot of opportunities for offensive pressure gameplay, and I think it's really beneficial. Altina has Twin Blades, which is really great for just getting through damage reduction, and Dual Phase Brave, which is incredible for damage output. Har is, while not necessarily as strong as Altina damage output wise, he is way more defensive because he has true damage reduction with guard bearing 4, or if you give him Gambit, he'll always reduce a lot of damage, which is incredible. The same thing also applies to Cherish, who's basically just a better Har, Cormac, who does the same thing, but he doesn't have Brave, Summermail Shez, who has Brave but doesn't have true damage reduction, but he does have Kanto and true damage. I think he was probably way better off with Gambit, because with Kanto, he's allowed to go in, go back, and he's always going to get a consistent amount of damage reduction from his B, as long as the special is really high. And with Gambit also giving true damage, he can also output a really significant amount of damage. And with it, he can still perform similarly to Altina, but at the same time, he definitely doesn't have the same defensive prowess. You could always give him Deflect Melee to make up for it though. But otherwise, you have stuff like Lucia, Asker, Brave Dimitri, who have really absurdly high amounts of damage reduction properties, especially Dimitri and Asker, who have true damage reduction. And when paired with outside damage reduction like Blue Line Rule, Guard 4, Null Counter, Disrupt 4, they'll be shrugging off so much damage that it actually makes them way more obnoxious than arguably a lot of other near saves. And lastly, there's Freyr, who I wanted to give an honorable mention to because not only is he a really absurd bulk monster because of Dreamhorn and all the stuff he comes with, but he also has Dream Deliverer, which is a really nice supportive skill if you're just trying to remove any sort of penalties from the field, which can be really beneficial against stuff that may have exposure, sabotage, you name it, so you can make tanking way easier. But there are other notable supports that you could use alongside a lot of these near saves, such as Eliwood, who grants bonus doubler. It doesn't matter if it's the legendary one or the kid one. You will have to have a lot of visible attack to get the most out of it, so it may not work for some characters over others, but it is also worth mentioning that you will also have to deploy a dragon or beast unit to even get the effects going. You have young Eliwood, who does the same thing as well. Brave Robin, who has tipped the scales, which is incredible for special manipulation stuff, and it also grants stats during combat. I honestly really recommend this for not only Robin as a near save, but you could also use it for supportive capabilities, which is really great there. You have Maria and Ymir and all the other ones that grant miracle effects, which is really beneficial if you're just trying to survive. I would argue that Miracle is probably one of the better ones you could run around here, especially if you're going to be running far saves, because they are a lot more prone to damage than a lot of the melee ones. But even still, Miracle is always great to have around. You also have Milla, who initially I wasn't going to throw on here, but I forgot she grants a lull attack to pretty much everybody across the map, which is really strong for tanking. And if you did want to make her into a near save, you could always do that too. She's surprisingly pretty decent as a near save with that, but her follow-up and damage output's probably not going to be the best, but even still, low attack is always good. We also have Brave Corin, who can give the new terrain effect, which can be really good for AoE gameplay, especially if you are a lot more lopsided in bulk. It will be really beneficial just to have any sort of outside damage protection, so you can make tanking during combat way more easily. And otherwise, a lot of characters pretty much just fall into the same niche. They give damage reduction, they give breath, they give special cooldown manipulation, they give all sorts of stuff. In my opinion, these are probably going to be some of the better units that you could use as support options when pairing up with a near save or far save. But if you don't want to use any of these, the best ones, there's also so many more options on the melee side that you can use. Any unit with a good amount of damage reduction or bulk could easily make good use of this because they don't have to frontline, they don't have to omni tank, they don't have to do a lot of the god sword stuff, so they could easily just sit in the back and come in whenever necessary. You have a free male Lear if you wanted to try it out with him. He has a lot of attack and speed and damage reduction, so if you just wanted to try it out just before you commit to anything else, you could always try it with him with Soren, and you'll probably get some good results there. Otherwise, if you wanted to go into like a really hyper amount of investment for like your speedy god sword, you could always try some sort of spurn set or vital asha, basically just stacking up more damage reduction akin to the Lears. It doesn't really matter who per se, as long as they have the speed for it. You could even use a lot of the inheritables like Arcane Devourer or Jiang or Lewin or any of those, and that should be pretty good there, which is also why I have them in the damage reduction or bulk category down below, because while they're not necessarily the units I would recommend, it's definitely a bit more as a generalization for units that would be using the weapon anyway. You could also use it on units that are completely lopsided, because more often than not, units that are attacking at one range are going to be targeting defense, so it's not as big of a deal there as it would be for a far save. So even someone like Gregor with solid ground floor, if you were to just give him all sorts of attack speed and defense, he could still do pretty good work even if his res is on the lower side. You also have Flame Lin, who I would argue is a really amazing near save because of Verdict of Decay giving an absurd amount of stats, having access to godlike reflexes, and all sorts of other infantry goodies that will allow her to just become really obnoxious to deal with if you can't outspeed her. A lot of other units can do this too, but I'm pretty sure Lin probably has the highest ceiling for it because of Verdict of Decay. But still, you have other units like Roy, Rutger, Far, Mia, just basically a lot of the God Sword dodgers for the most part. I'm not going to be going over every single one because it's pretty much just going to be a lot of rinse and repeat for the most part, but it's more of a general idea. You could also give it to young Ike, who, while not having any slang, does have access to Gambit 4, which is a new damage reduction skill that also grants true damage if the special cooldown count is pretty high. And because Radiant Aether is 4 cooldown with Sturdy War Sword, he's going to be able to get 40 flat damage reduction per hit and a bunch of true damage. And again, you could also apply this to a lot of the other slower swords if they just have the bulk. If you give them a high cooldown special with Gambit, then they're going to be able to function really well as a near save. You also have Aether, who I also almost slept on, but because Power of Nihility grants dual phase surge, it's honestly really obnoxious to deal with because no matter what damage you deal to her, she could always heal it back as long as she gets the special off, which is more often than not going to happen because she's absurdly fast. And I think one of the fan favorites as of right now is definitely going to be Legendary Silesse. He got a really nice refine, which can definitely function way more in the enemy phase. He does have a bit of issues here and there when it comes to omni-tanking stuff, but a lot of units do, so it's not really as big of a fault on him. But if you wanted to prioritize him and just make him a melee near save, you can absolutely do that, and you can remove a lot of the issues that you might have otherwise have from ranged threats, and he still gets damage reduction per hit, which is really, really good. And with Holy Wars N2, he gets enemy phase brave, he gets a bunch of true damage, he gets a lot of attack and defense, and he's probably going to be really, really difficult to pierce through. Other than that, you have Unity users who can pretty much just stack Unity, and because they're going to be near save or near allies all the time, it's not going to be as big of a deal. So your Fallen Ikes, your Echidnas, or anybody with Legendary Robin support, Echidna probably stands up the most because she also has damage reduction, she has damage reflection, she has breath, so you can continually stack up as many stats as you want, and you could give her Legendary Robin support and become a really massive stat ball. And the last two I quickly want to cover are basically the Miracle users, or the ones with damage reduction, so your Niffles, your Ymirs, so the ones that could just survive way more easily as near saves because they have gimmicks that allow them to. And Duma, who, while I think isn't exactly the best unit nowadays, or he's definitely a lot better now because Freyr is a thing and you could use him in Anima Season, one of the big things is that he can't use any sort of save because of Upheaval being there, but you could give him near save as support through Soren and still keep the building destruction gimmick and use him as a competent near save if possible. And I think that is worth mentioning if you did want to use him on some sort of Aether Raid's defense setting. Otherwise, you have your Vantage, your dual phase brave units, guard bearing guidance units, or special manipulators. I think Vantage and dual phase brave is probably the next best step when it comes to defensive pressure because of the ability to get 2 guaranteed attacks or a first attack off first, meaning that there's less of a chance they're going to be initiating on you, and you can allow for a lot more defensive pressure that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten from other units. So even someone like Brave Marth, who's getting refined next month, you could give him ×4, you know, the typical God Sword set with attack speed finish 4, and because he has Vantage and Shining Emblem, he could always get Shining Emblem off first, and he could always soak any sort of Spurn 4 hit, which will be really, really good. You could go with somebody like Shez, Laszlo, Keaton, Winter Altina, any of the infantry dual phase brave units with access to a good amount of damage output is going to be really, really nice. I think Shez and a lot of the other ones that don't have slaying are also particularly great because he could use Gambit 4. Unfortunately, you can't give it to Keaton, but he does have access to other skills that can still allow him to function pretty well. I think defensive pressure wise, these are probably going to be some of the better ones you could grab. You could even give it to somebody like Lex or Finn or Summer Shez, and well, Lex isn't exactly the best unit either. He still can use Gambit, and with his really absurdly high defense stat and dual phase brave effect, he can still get true damage and damage reduction per hit, which is really, really absurd, especially if they do target his defense stat over his res stat. That could be really, really obnoxious. And I think the one other one I really want to highlight is New Year Ash, because she also has the guidance shtick with opening retainer, so you could still have allies teleport in, and she can act as a near save after the fact if she has the status ready, which is really, really good. But if you did have any other sword that you wanted to build, you could always try it with Wyvern Katana, but it is worth mentioning that it being 8 might is not really the best, so a lot of units that don't really have the attack set aren't really going to be making the best use of it. But I would still recommend a lot of the other ones on the list, or any sort of unit with a really high attack set and min-max stat line with the Wyvern Katana. Otherwise, you still have the guard bearing guidance shtick, which is pretty self-explanatory. It was the same stuff I was pretty much covering earlier, but some units definitely do it a lot better because they either have innate Canto in their weapon, they're Catcher or Credelia, they have Unity, they have true damage reduction, or they're dancers. And I think the dancer ones are also particularly nice because they have extra utility with the ability to give extra actions, which is really, really good. So somebody like Dancer Eldigan or Larm will always be pretty good in my book. And lastly, you just have your special manipulators, most of them being dragons, and then the one Lif over there, the ones that could just get really easy specials or just stop specials from going off really, really easily. So somebody with Scowl, you give it to Garen, who also has Guard, which can be really, really obnoxious because unless you have tempo, you won't be able to get through him whatsoever with a special. Or even somebody like Muspel or Lif, who have any sort of accelerated cooldown gimmicks where they could get a really good amount of damage output just out of the gate because of either Domain of Flame or Piercing or anything of the sort. And I think when it comes to near save candidates, these are probably going to be some of the best ones you could do. And while this isn't every single unit on the list, I think it does cover a general idea of what units you probably want to consider when giving to near save capabilities. That being said, your far save options are definitely going to be a lot more limited. Near saves definitely have a way higher floor and ceiling because there's a lack of piercing threats and they have more stats and gimmicks to work with. While the ranged ones could always work, they are way more highly dependent that they can either eat a hit or they have a gimmick that makes their defensive pressure really good. And unfortunately, a lot of the units really don't fall into that category, but there's still plenty of options that you can do. I think Ninja Camilla, New Year Asker, and Summer Ymir are probably some of the highlight ones. Ninja Camilla because she has instant Vantage, Slaying, Dual Phase Brave, which is incredibly good for defensive pressure, and you can remove her A slot for Unity to grant her even more attack and resistance. Summer Ymir because she has Ever-Living Domain and a lot of damage reduction, so she could easily eat hits if needed, and she could heal back most of whatever she takes after combat, which is incredibly good. New Year Asker because he has pretty much his whole gimmick with true damage reduction, a lot of bulk, and really high damage output, and he has Open Domain, which can be really good for supporting capabilities. And Legendary Robin because he's a really massive stat ball, and if you don't really know by now, he's really obnoxious. The supports that you can use here are more or less going to be the same, but it will also depend on which units you're using it with. But otherwise, if you have really good amounts of damage reduction or natural bulk, you could use somebody like Godo. Brimiment, who also has dual phase gimmicks with his Refine, Void Tome. Celine, while not having the best defense, gets flat damage reduction based on the amount of present health her allies has, which is going to be really consistent. Julia is pretty much the same way, except she has a bit more stats and stuff to work with. Byleth, who has flat speed-based damage reduction and a lot of other stuff, including Tempo and Sublime Heaven, can be really nice. Rebecca, who has 60% damage reduction against ranged foes, which is incredibly good. And even Legendary Guinevere, who has true damage reduction, but a bit low defense for my liking. It can still be used to great effect, but you will have to be careful because a lot of stuff has piercing nowadays, so anything could really just shred her. That being said, if you're looking for a good magic tank, she's definitely one of the better ones you got. And if you did have any sort of infantry bow or cab bow or any bow that could get Tana's arcane bow, then you could probably try it there because that also has flat damage reduction on the first hit, although it's a bit more finicky. You also have your dual phase brave and vantage units, which are probably still going to be really beneficial. I would recommend pairing legendary Shez, Leaf, and Leghorn with miracle support because there's a good chance they could easily just get one shot and not really do anything afterward. But I think the one that really stands out is going to be Kronya because she has instant vantage in her weapon, meaning that she doesn't necessarily have to run miracle, but it could still also be really good as a failsafe. That or even Brave Robin support because he grants 2 cooldown during combat to Kronya. So with Special Spiral 3 and Brave Robin, she could always retaliate with a lethality first hit, which is incredibly good. But also if you wanted to try doing some bulk stuff with the Wyvern Yumi, it's going to follow a similar issue with Wyvern Katana where it just has no might, but if you do have a good amount of attack and bulk, you could definitely make use of it. Otherwise, you just have your regular stat balls like Cliff, From, Leon, a lot of other ones I probably missed, but there aren't exactly a lot of ranged stat balls, but you can still use a fair amount of them. Cliff is probably one of the standout ones because he has Guard, Spectrum 9, Slaying, and a lot of other stuff, and a really flat stat line that could be used for pretty much all sorts of stuff. But I think one of the funniest ones is definitely going to be Halloween Zane because you can make him into a far save, and as long as he's within 2 spaces of anybody with really good bulk and attack, then he could just act as a really competent far save. He does lack a lot of the other gimmicks that make the best ones really good, but I think there's potential with him there. Otherwise, you can still try some stuff with Snow Globe from Winter Arthur or even Tannenbow from a Winter Ignatz. And lastly, there's pretty much just the Miracle users who are also going to be a bit more gimmicky, but it could also work out if the scenario is right for them. For example, you could give Celica Finish and Mystic Boost so she could constantly loop Miracle, but if there's any sort of Brave attack or follow-up that allows him to get 2 attacks out, then she's probably going to fall, which is unfortunate. Deirdre also falls in line with a similar issue, but she just has no defense. She has a lot of res, so she could res tank really well, but if you're trying to take any sort of physical hit, it's going to be a lot more limited in scope. But as far as ranged far saves go, it's definitely going to be a lot more limiting because they don't really have the capabilities for defensive pressure comparatively to melee. And it's also the reason why you see a lot of one-range saviors as far saves, because they have access to stuff like Hardy Fighter and a lot of other skills that allows them to act really defensively. But that's pretty much the idea when it comes to using Soren's assigned decoy for support. And if you did have any other ideas or any other stuff that I probably missed, let me know down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.